What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about HIV testing. Join Liam Scheff on the Myths of Science and find out that it's all a bunch of crap. What? All right, that's misleading. Why don't I like HIV tests? You can watch the YouTube video. It's just go to my YouTube channel, the site that the FBI lent me for a while. Whoever runs YouTube, Google, CIA, whoever they are, the all-powerful overlords. Thanks for the YouTube channel. Thanks for the little bit of voice out there. So you go to the YouTube channel. It's my username is Liam Scheff, LIAMSCHEFF, and it's the top video, and it says MOS, which is Myths of Science with Liam Scheff, HIV testing. And I talk about it. What I do in the video is what I'm going to do now. I read from the package insert, which is the legal disclaimer, right? Legal disclaimer on the inside of the package. It's the thing the lawyers say, you've got to have this because we can't tell everybody the truth. We can call it anything we want. We can advertise it as an HIV test. We can advertise it as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then on the bottom it says, contains no actual peanut butter, nor jelly, nor sandwich, nor bread. Legal disclaimer. We live in America, so we have legal disclaimers. They're the small places where we're forced to tell the truth. They're tiny places where we're forced to tell the truth. So if you go into the legal disclaimer of the HIV test, and you can find a lot of these at a website that I happen to run and a website that I don't happen to run. I'll give both of those out right now. One is called Reduce the Burden, because that's what we have to do. We have to take off the burden of HIV testing because it's a giant fraud. ReduceTheBurden.org, organization, or you can go to ARAS, ARAS.ab.ca. What? Alberta Reappraising, look, I didn't make up the name. I'm not Canadian. I wouldn't make up a name like that. Alberta Reappraising AIDS Society, which happens to be a great research site. Absolutely great research site. And there's a testing section there, and I've just loaded those into the Blog Talk Network chat room. And you can go and you can read thousands of citations from the medical literature that say funny things. Funny things like, at present, what? At present, there is no recognized standard for establishing the presence or absence of antibodies to HIV in human blood. Hold on. It's an HIV test. Let's do that again. At present, there is no recognized standard. No recognized standard, you say? That's right. No recognized standard for establishing the presence or absence of antibodies to HIV to human. No, it's called an HIV antibody test, but of course, here's the legal disclaimer. The lawyer said you better put that in because someday somebody's going to sue you. Someday somebody's going to sue you, and you're going to have to say, but we told you. It's right there in the legal disclaimer, so F off. The risk of an asymptomatic, that is a not ill or a healthy person, the risk of an asymptomatic person with repeatedly reactive, repeatedly positive serum developing AIDS or an AIDS-related condition is not known. In other words, you can be positive over and over and over and over and over again, and whether you develop any illness that we're going to call AIDS is not known. We don't know. Hey, that's the magic of that diagnosis. You could get sick, you could not get sick, and if you get sick, we're going to tell you that it's AIDS because we gave you the test, and if you get sick and you don't have the test, we're going to tell you have whatever set of illnesses that you have. They may be serious immune deficiency illnesses. If you have a reactive test, and you may have serious immune deficiency illnesses, you may have that. What's the difference? There is none. Clinical studies continue to clarify and refine the interpretation and medical significance of the Clinical studies continue to clarify and refine the interpretation and medical significance of the presence of antibodies. They just told me the presence of antibodies to HIV. Hold on, line 1 says there is no standard for establishing the presence or absence of antibodies. Now here in line 3 they say they grant themselves the presence of antibodies, and then they say that they're continuing to clarify and refine the importance of them. Okay, they lied. They're not antibodies to anything. They don't know what the antibodies are for. AIDS and AIDS-related conditions are, here it is. Here's the centerfold. Here's the money shot. This is all, by the way, what am I reading you? This is all from Abbott Laboratories HIV test. Abbott Laboratories bought the patent from Robert Gallo in 1983 or 84. They bought the proteins that he had grown in leukemia T cells. Leukemia T cells. Those leukemia T cells were growing in what was called an eternal T cell line. They never died, an immortal line. It was immortal. It never died. What was HIV supposed to do? Kill T cells. Where was the supposed HIV growing? In T cells. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. That's exactly how it works. HIV, which you can't purify, which is no one thing, which is a million different sub-protein fragments and a million genetic strands that don't have much to do with each other at all. They grow these proteins where? In T cells. Why? Because HIV doesn't kill T cells, please. They destroy their theory from the beginning, and they care. They get people on the fear. They put the hook in their mouth and they say, but look, gay men died. Gay men died in the 80s. They did. They were doing far too many drugs for far too long. They had far too many partners, sometimes 30, sometimes 50 a night, sometimes hundreds per week. An anonymous coupling, young gay men in the inner cities, in the gay ghettos where they had been pushed away from regular society. They had been pushed out. They hadn't been embraced. They weren't part of society. They weren't allowed to be part of society. And a small subset of them, not all gay men. It's not about being gay. It's about being young, gay, and of a certain inclination to want to go and really express yourself. Went into these gay ghettos. They had so many partners. They invented the glory hole, the hole you drill in the bathroom stall to have sex with strangers. That's an invention of men, not of women. They had so many sexual partners that they had parasitic infections, bowel infections, gonorrheal, syphilitic infections. They had chlamydia and worms. They had dysentery going around in small communities in San Francisco, dysentery. They were taking antibiotics by the fistful to knock back everything they had, and they did this for 5 to 10 years, and then their intestines fell apart, and they died. And it must have been bloody horrible. And then the mainstream came along and said, the right wing came along and it said, God hates fags and you deserved it. And the left wing came along and said, no, God doesn't hate fags. It must be a retrovirus. It must be a cancer virus. And so Robert Gallo, who failed to prove that viruses cause cancer, along with all the other a-holes at the National Cancer Institute, David Baltimore and the rest of these clowns at the NIH, who had failed for a decade, stealing millions and millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers, stealing them to try to prove that cancers were caused by virus. Totally failed, the Nixon cancer program. They said, you gay men must have, we'll call it the gay cancer. You have this thing growing in you, it's Kaposi sarcoma. This must be caused by a virus. Let's recycle the crap that we already have been done and failed to do, and we'll call it GRID now, gay-related. Gay-related. It's gay-related now. It's not just a cancer, it's a gay cancer. Well, lo and behold, they find out the so-called gay cancer is caused by this drug that the gay guys in this fast-lane lifestyle are huffing, a drug called poppers, a drug that says flammable, fatal if swallowed on the label, a drug that's a known mutagen, this is a carcinogenic DNA mutating drug, and they're huffing it all night. Why? Because it gives them a great rush. It expands their blood vessels and lets them have longer, prolonged orgasms. Orgasms? Exactly. What's that, producer monkey? I sure did. Orgasms. This is Myth of Science with Liam Scheff. We're talking about the AIDS, the history of AIDS. They're huffing poppers all night long. This is well recorded in the medical literature, the gay literature, the social literature of the time. Poppers. Look up poppers, gay, 70s. It was all the rage. Everybody walking around huffing this stuff that smelled like dirty socks because it loosened their sphincter and allowed them to have long, long orgasms. Okay? It allowed them to have more sex than their body could have otherwise had. Get it? The thing's a mutagen. Where do they get the Kaposi sarcoma? In and around the areas of entrance of air, the capillaries of the lungs, around this kind of thing. They get it in and around their mouths and nose. Big surprise. Later, the Kaposi sarcoma is knocked off the AIDS list. Okay, we understand that's not caused by the cancer virus, but they'd already put the cancer virus theory in place. The cancer virus that you can't purify, that's too wily, that doesn't come in, there's no one size or shape to what they found. They didn't care. Oh, you found a type C? Oh, you found a type D? Oh, you found a type B? Oh, we'll just say it's all one thing. That's like saying I found a Ferrari and you have a Ferrari and you have a Pinto, a crap 70s car. You have a smart car, and I've got a great Ferrari, and you say, well, we both have cars, so they must be exactly the same. Are they? You want to trade? Please. There's a big difference when you're talking about type B and type C and type D particles. You can't just swap them around, but that's what they did because nobody looks into the details of this thing. It's well known that they did this. It's well recorded in the medical literature, but nobody cares. It's well recorded that Robert Gallo cultured, what's it called? Salival tissue. What's that, producer monkey? Again, I know. Salival tissue. Orgasm. Salival tissue. The secret of the day is orgasmum. Orgasmum. Cultured salival tissue. What did he manage to produce from the salival tissue? Hey, saliva, he managed to produce exactly what he said was causing AIDS. That's right. He managed to get these little budding particles to pop out of tissue that he cultured from saliva glands. Do we consider HTLV3, which they later codified as HIV to make it universally applicable? Do you think that we have HIV in our mouths? Do you think that people with AIDS carry around a mouthful of HIV? Well, you can culture the same little budding particles. You can culture the same budding particles in pregnant women, from placentas, from lizards, from mice, from dogs. You can culture these budding particles in all animals, but they decided that it was very special at the time that they could culture some budding particles from gay guys who were doing so many drugs that their intestines fell out, that they didn't have any mucosal layer left, that they got every fungal infection in the world. Then they go into the hospital. And the helpful doctors there, what do? The helpful doctors there bomb them with antibiotics. They've been taking antibiotics for years, for decades. Okay, the death rate, it starts to go down by 86, 87. By 86, 87, it's going down. What did they introduce in 87? A drug called AZT. What is it? It's a toxic chemotherapeutic agent. It's a toxic cancer drug. Discontinued because it was not brought into the market because it was too bloody toxic for cancer patients. They give this drug that destroys bone marrow. The death rate quadruples. It's from in the 10,000 range to in the 45, 48,000 range within about 5 years. They then decide to discontinue high-dose AZT. Guess what happens? The death rate goes down. Coincidence? But they get you into it through the HIV testing. That's how they get you in. All of that disappears. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a flying bleep. Nobody gives a producer monkey. What? I know. I know. I feel you. I feel your pain. And if you talk about this, the fascist arm of the AIDS mafia comes forward and says you hate Africans or you hate gay people. Really? Please. You hate gay people because you don't want them to be poisoned to death? You don't want them to be held up against the wall and given these tests that don't tell them anything? But here's how they get you. Oh, but I tested positive for something. I must have tested positive for something. Yeah, you tested reactive for one of 1,000 things. Nobody knows. None of these proteins have ever been properly characterized or tested against anything else. All of the proteins in these tests are synthetic. They're grown in bacteria. They're recombinant at this point. They grow them in bacteria. They're not even real anymore. They don't come from people anymore. All of the proteins in the tests are recombinant. They've been refined, made to conform to consensus agreements about how many kilodaltons they weigh. None of it's real. You go and you take the test and they convince you. And then you start looking at data. Oh, but more people who test positive do get sick. No, they're taking a group of people. They're testing them with a test that doesn't tell them anything. They're then telling this group of people that they're going to die no matter what. They tend to give this test in places like deadly, desperately poor rural Africa or urban Africa, the slums of Africa where there are tin shack towns, Baptistans, and no clean water. That's where they give a few of the tests. Then they project those numbers onto thousands and thousands and millions of people. 4,000 tests in South Africa can become 2 million HIV positives by projection through the epidemiological accounting services of the World Health Organization. I'm not kidding. That's exactly how it works. You can look it up, or you don't have to. This is Liam Scheff. You're listening to Myths of Science. Thanks to our sponsors this half hour, Rapture Food. That's right. If you are worried about 2012, the end of the world might be coming. Could have come yesterday. Might come in an hour or a day. Nobody knows. Keep your basement stocked with Rapture Food. USDA leftover horse and cow meat, including the testicles. You'll not want to miss it. You can also get leftover school lasagnas, freeze-dried, so they'll last for an eternity because you're going to need them after the rapture. All right. Thanks, Rapture Food. We're talking... rapturefood.com. Go look it up. We're talking about HIV testing. HIV testing is a giant fraud. HIV tests come up. How many things do they come up positive for, Liam? What do you want to know? Okay, how about this? 100, 150? Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. They come up positive for reasons that nobody understands. They come up positive in pregnant women. Pregnancies are a well-known cause of cross-reacting antibody tests because women's bodies produce a ton of antibodies when they are when they're pregnant. How about things that shouldn't test positive? I mean, at what point do you want to disqualify a test from use? I mean, here's the question. Flu vaccines. You look it up in the New England Journal of Medicine, 2006. Hey, we got to stop giving these flu vaccine tests because they're making a lot of these Western blots and HIV tests come up positive or indeterminate. We can't tell the difference. What about viral load tests, PCR tests? Well, they come up positive when people are negative on antibody tests, and they come up negative when people are positive on antibody tests, and they are never the same. You can give a so-called viral load, a PCR test, to somebody in the morning, and they'll have a different number than they'll have at night. You can take a blood sample, and you can do it with two different tests, and they'll have two wildly different, hundreds of thousands of units different results. It's been done. You can take the same blood sample, you use the same test, and you'll get different. Why? Because there are no standards, because these things come up positive for anything and everything, and nobody knows what you're measuring. So if you're looking and if you've been tested and you say, but Liam, I must be tested with something, there must be some reason why. There's no bloody reason why. You don't know. You don't know the lot that you got. You don't know what lot of test you got. There were massive so-called false positive outbreaks in New York City recently because the test they were using was too sensitive. Don't think that there's some specific reason. If you're worried about health, worry about your health. Take good care of yourself. Get the crap out of your diet. Get the bovine growth hormone out of your diet. Get the pesticides out of your diet. Get the greens and the whole grains and the beans and the essential fatty acids in your diet. Get the glutathione and the selenium into your diet. Get the garbage out, put the good stuff in. Take a lot of vitamin C. Take a lot of good vitamin C. Take a ton of it. Read about it before you do it, but if you're worried about health, take it. It's an antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's a reducing agent. You can get rid of heavy metals in your body with it. It's a chelating agent. You go read about this stuff and then make a decision to use it. Now, I'm not a doctor and I can't give medical advice, but guess what? Nobody at the NIH is either. If you go and read their website, they'll tell you in the disclaimer that all of the stuff they offer are purely opinions, and they're not legally responsible for a word that they tell you. That's the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. That's the AMA, the American Medical Association. That's the World Health Organization. You go and you go look at the limitations of their website, the disclaimers. They'll tell you that it's all an opinion. All they're doing is expressing their opinion, and they're not responsible if you happen to take a drug that they recommend and die. They're not responsible. No, they don't feel like being responsible, but you're not allowed to take vitamin C, and you're not allowed to recommend vitamin C, and you're not allowed to recommend selenium and glutathione, even though they're cell foods and they regulate your cells. You may have a deregulated cell. You may have cells that are deregulating, and that's why you're expressing more antibodies or why you're expressing more endogenous retroviral sequences. There's no way to know. Nobody's ever done any kind of science with this stuff. It all lives in the realm of fantasy at this point. It all lives in the realm of wishful thinking from these a-holes at the NIH and the WHO who insist that all Africans are sick because they have sex. Oh, but Liam, the number of African mortality went up as soon as the AIDS thing. No. They brought the AIDS definition to an existing case of people who were sick. Where did they bring it? They brought it to Uganda, which had been in the 20-year death spiral after Idi Amin of civil war. Of course, the mortality rate was higher. Guess what has happened in all African nations, despite the so-called AIDS menace? Population rates have gone up. That's right. Birth rates, population rates have gone up in the worst hit AIDS nations. Why? Because it's a fraud. Yeah, people get sick and they die. Yeah, they get sick and they die in really poor countries. But this is not a sex problem that is killing Africans because they have sex. It's a problem of endemic poverty. At least if you look at it, and you look at it carefully, and you look at it conscientiously, and over time you're going to go, wow, damn, these people don't have sexual practices that are any different. There is no sexual component to what they're calling HIV transmissibility. what you've got is poverty. What you've got, ladies and germs, is a remaking of that old eugenic feeling, that old thing that we used to do worldwide. We used to run around the world. The European powers used to run around the world, and they'd say, and the Pope would say to the kings of France and Spain, well, you can enslave all the Americans. You can enslave all the people, those brown-skinned people over in the Americas. The Pope would put out a papal bull. He would sign it with a ball of wax and his papal ring. It's called a papal bull because of the ball of wax, bowl of wax. And it would say, you can take all the Americans because they're godless. No, you can take them. You can take their gold. You can do whatever you want to them because they are not Christians. And you can go to Africa, and they're even worse than the Native Americans, by the way. Yeah, that's what the Pope, because they're really godless, and they're actually a lot darker, and they don't look quite like us, so we don't trust them. So you can not only take their gold, you can actually enslave them for perpetuity. Now, this was legal law. This was the law. This was legal writ for centuries. That's the origin of the slave trade, of the legal writ of the Pope. The Pope said to the King of Portugal, King and Queen of Portugal, you can take, it's in the papal bull pertaining to Africa. There's a papal bull pertaining to the Americas. It was legal writ. You can take these and you can enslave them, you can make them servants, you can try to convert them. But if you can't convert these Africans, you can kill them and enslave them. So what do we do now? We're not allowed to do that now. What do we do now? We say, take this test. By the way, it comes up positive for people who are pregnant. It comes up positive for people who have malaria, tuberculosis, alcoholic liver problems, any kind of liver problems. It comes up positive in mice. It comes up positive in mice. Is this a test in mice that have not been exposed to people with AIDS? Not been exposed to what they consider HIV, which is just blood that they consider to be HIV positive with another fake HIV test. There was a researcher called Roberto Geraldo. He worked as a clinician. He worked in a New York hospital, and he was working in the testing clinic. And he's an MD, and he said, we do funny things with these HIV tests, he said. Number one, we dilute the blood 400 times before we test anybody with it. We dilute the blood 400 times. In other words, we're not looking for a specific reaction. We're just trying to make sure we don't get too strong a reaction. So we dilute the blood 400 times. There's no test on earth that we dilute the blood 400 times for. So you're not looking for anything specific. He said, why don't we take the test without diluting the blood? So he did, and he rounded up the people in his lab, and he said, look, we're going to take this test, and your result is all waived, and this won't count. And they took the test, and when they didn't run the test diluted, when they ran it with straight blood, guess what happened? Everybody, all the workers, tested HIV positive, or HIV antibody positive. Everybody is positive. Because the antibodies, the proteins, are not specific, because they come from a bunch of gobbledygook that Robert Gallo cooked up in leukemia cells, remember? Leukemia T cells, which are an immortal line, which don't die. Doesn't that tell you something? There's something that's supposed to kill T cells. Where do they grow at T cells? Are we done yet? Can we end this bloody, stupid conversation? AIDS is poverty. AIDS is major drug abuse. It is not a sex problem. We want it to be because as a culture, we've got no rules about sex anymore. We've got no rules, and so we cling on to this. People who have anxiety about sex cling on to this. I've been one of them. The only times I've ever been tested or worried about it in my life was when I had great anxiety, not about being sick, but about the person I had sex with, about whether I felt bad, I felt dirty, I didn't feel like I had done something good. Why? Because maybe I made a mistake, or I was with somebody that I actually really shouldn't have been with that I didn't like, or who I later found out wasn't a good person, or maybe I was being bad. Maybe I was in a relationship and I had been unfaithful. Maybe I was being young and in my early 20s. This is why people feel they're infected. They feel they're infected because they feel they've done something wrong. So you go like a parishioner to the priest, you go for a confession. You think I'm kidding? That's exactly the way that HIV clinicians understand their work. They understand it as though they were a clinician, they were a priest taking what? They were a priest taking confession. That you think I'm joking. That's exactly how they do it. And if you want to know if I'm serious or not, you can look up a paper by an HIV counselor at University of California, I think San Francisco, who says that going to get an HIV test is exactly the same. It's the exact same motivation and feeling as going and receiving Penance for your sins. You're doing penance for your sins. This is from a paper by Nicholas Sheehan, HIV Insight Prevention Editor, University of California, San Francisco. Here, the question came in, UCSF. A lesbian at very low risk for HIV infection. At low risk. Why? Insists on getting tested twice a year. Should she get tested so often? Listen to the answer. I find, this is an HIV counselor. I find that testing begets more testing because people find it convenient to get a clean slate every 6 or 12 months. I think HIV counselors can learn a lot from the history of confession rituals, something I explored in my dissertation, says Nicholas Sheehan. Testing has become a routine part of dating and courtship rituals, as well as a way for individuals to cope with the growing anxieties around sex and intimacy during the conservative period that followed the sexual revolution. The test and the intense scrutiny imposed by the test counselor's risk assessment represent a modern version of the ancient rite of confession. What? The intense scrutiny imposed by the test counselor's risk assessment? Yeah, that's right. It's all risk assessment. Are you black enough? Are you gay enough? Who have you been with? Where have you been? We don't have a culture anymore. We don't have rules about who you have sex with anymore. A negative test, continues Nicholas, HIV counselor, a counselor to the counselors. A negative test is therefore sought not so much in response to a particular risk incident, so much as in response to a sense of moral or sexual pollution that is often expressed as a nagging doubt about one's HIV status. In this way, a negative test result represents a kind of absolution. However, because the epidemiological and ethical or even theological significance of HIV risk behaviors remains shrouded in uncertainty, a negative test result offers only a fleeting sense of reassurance. An absolution must be sought again and again. For centuries, priests and theologians debated the issue of scrupulosity and recidivism, or how to deal with the spiritually worried well and those recalcitrant sinners who regularly confessed but refused to change their ways. This is an HIV test counselor, for God's sake. He's giving away the store. It's not real. We got you because you're afraid. We got you because you're thinking about sex, and you're afraid, and you're afraid you've done something wrong. That's why we've got you. Because the tests are not real. The tests never related to any particular set of proteins. The proteins were introduced ad hoc. They were agreed upon through consensus. Somebody found a protein that weighed so many kilodaltons. Somebody weighed one that weighed approximately. They compromised. Somebody came along later and found another protein, not from any particular particle. They just found another protein. Don Francis's group found a protein that weighed 51 kilodaltons. They said, can we throw it in with your other protein? Sure, that's also going to be part of it now. That's now part of it. No, I'm not joking. That's how it works. It's a bland, giant parade of fictions. Do people get sick? You bet people get sick. People are sick all over the world. People are sick from the American diet. People are sick from a million different things. What makes them an AIDS patient? Are they at risk? Are they in a risk group? Or do they walk through the testing rigmarole? Do they get sucked into it? And at that point, are they engaged? Are they made to trust for some reason? Do they trust enough? There's something. There must be something the medical authorities are saying that's correct. The rate of illness went up in Africa. The rate of illness went up in Africa. Nobody was looking before. Nobody cared. Nobody bothered. Nobody thought about it. Sally Struthers walked through piles of dead children and asked for money to feed them, and nobody cared. You put a sexual label on it, suddenly people decide to count Africans. How are they counting? They're not counting. They're counting the dead left over from the scourge of Idi Amin. They're counting the dead left over in the Congo. They're counting the dead in South Africa. They're counting the dead from apartheid. And then they say they're the victim of a new virus. You understand? They never counted before. They never cared. But now they can sell it. They can apply drugs to it. This is how it works. And these are, you get a test like this. You get a test like this and you don't know about this, or you have some faith in the medical establishment because we're supposed to be able to. That's why we're supposed to be able to. Well, to quote the line often attributed to people talking about the CIA, to quote the line about the CIA, it's a wilderness of mirrors. These people are lying by not doing due diligence. Doctors are lying by not reading the package inserts of their tests. They're lying to you. And they don't have to do anything to gain your trust because they're in power, they're in authority. And as a human species, we give our power and trust away blindly, unconsciously. We give it away to certain groups of people. We give it to the priests. We give it to the kings. HIV is a realm of priests. It all falls apart upon inspection. AIDS is any illness. It is any immune deficiency. It happens all over the world. But you can reverse immune deficiency in many cases. If you try to treat an HIV test, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to take drugs that kill you. And they will. And if you want to do that, it's your business, and I'll never get in your way. I can't stop you. I don't have the power that the mainstream has to take your children away from you and put them in the home of other people and to threaten you with jail time for having an HIV test result. I don't have that kind of power.